Sheree, come and read our passage from Luke.
Today's first reading is from Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, and followed him.
Well, we're continuing to think about what discipleship means through the lens of those folks who encountered Jesus in the New Testament. We talked about Mary last week, who was asked to do a remarkable thing. And we made a couple observations. One was this: when Jesus calls to us, God encounters us and invites us in to be a part of what he is already doing. The work is already afoot. God's already active in the world, and he invites us to be a part of it. And Mary could have said no. In fact, in Jesus' day, most of the people that heard him speak didn't choose to follow him. The majority didn't. And even among those who did for a season, many of them fell away after a while. They turned away when things got too weird. So we're invited into what God is doing. And secondly, the way Mary did this, and she's a great model for us, is she did it with willing receptivity. She was an introvert. I think Mary was an introvert, And she said, "Yes, God, I'll be part of this thing that is beyond her capacity. It's outside of her ability." But she says, "I'll be a part of that." I think she's an introvert because, Luke tells us after the shepherds came to the scene where Jesus was born, it says that she pondered these things in her heart. She treasured them and pondered them in her heart. I'm an introvert. That's one of my natural skills, is to ponder things internally. Sometimes Laura thinks I'm not doing anything, but I'm really doing a lot. I'm busy pondering. Someone's got to ponder, right? So Mary's was a path of willing receptivity and actively wondering, pondering. Peter, who we pick up today, he was a different sort of character. His was a path of action. He's quite a different guy. As Joe already noted, Simon was his name. It's probably in Hebrew it would be Simeon. He lived in a Greek-speaking community, so he was Simon. Jesus calls him, gives him a nickname. In Aramaic, it would have been Cephas, a stone. In Greek, it would be Petros, so Peter. So I'll talk about Peter or Simon Peter. But, it's interesting that even that, his name doesn't stay still. This is an active man. Nothing about him is sedentary. Things change. Well, he's a model for us about the path of action. And so I've paired Peter's story with a reading from James, the Epistle of James, in the first chapter. It might be familiar to you. Listen as I read James 1, beginning of verse 22. Not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Rather, do what it says. Because anyone who listens to the word but doesn't do what it says, they're like one who look at their face in a mirror, and after having looked at themselves, they go away and immediately forget what they look like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. And those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep the tight rein on their tongues, well, they deceive themselves. Their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and as faultless as this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Discipleship, and it's maybe obvious, but we can overlook this. It's a process. It's an active process of change. To become a disciple isn't just to put yourself in a category. It's to undertake a step-by-step movement down a path, down a process. When the first two Gospels, Matthew and Mark, when they introduce Peter, you don't get very much of that process. It kind of goes like this. Jesus walks by the beach. He sees Andrew and his brother Simon there tending their nets. And by the way, if you're curious, mostly what fishermen do is tend to their nets. They spend more time taking care of their nets than they do fishing. It's really true. You can be a fisherman without a boat. You could borrow a boat, go out with a friend, or you could cast your net from the shore, which it sounds like Peter was doing in Mark's gospel, fishing from the shore. Jesus walks by and says, "Hey, you two, come and follow me." And immediately, says Mark, they left their nets. That's their livelihood, their most important tool. They leave their nets and immediately they go to follow Jesus. Okay, we might think that's a rash thing. Who are these guys? Why would they do that? Are they simple? Do they not know what they're getting into? But in Luke's passage, this one that Sheree read for us, we get a little bit more a sense of what's going on. It starts out with Jesus being in Peter's boat. And why is he in Peter's boat? Well, Peter let him in because he knows him. And we know from previous chapters that Peter has already encountered Jesus. He's heard him teach in the synagogue. He's witnessed miracles that he's done, like healing people and casting out demons. And more than that, in chapter 4, Jesus has been to Simon's house, even healed Simon's mother-in-law. And like a good Jewish mother-in-law, as soon as she was healed, she got up and made food and fed everybody. So Peter knows Jesus. He knows who Jesus is. His brother Andrew had been hanging out with John the Baptizer. In many ways, at this point, up to this point, Peter is a lot like us, just like us. He's heard a sermon. He's, heard about miracles. He's lifted to Christ his concern for sick relatives. That's like us. We read the Sermon on the Mount. We've heard about miraculous healings. We petition Jesus on behalf of our sick friends and relatives. Just like that. But Jesus wants to go farther. He wants to invade Peter's life even more. Call him to something deeper. And so what does he do? He gets into his boat. Now you're messing. Think about it. For Peter's boat, it was his place of work. It's most likely a point of his identity and skill and livelihood. Some of you guys out there, you can give me an amen if this is true, but work is a very important arena for men. It's where we exercise competence and skill. It's where we try to make a positive contribution to the world. It's how we provide for family. It is, in many ways, signals to our identity and our self-worth. The place of work is a pretty important place. Men in Jesus says, Peter, I want to get in that boat with you. Peter lets him in. It's a journey, someplace more intimate. I think for each of us, Jesus wants another step in, closer to that place where the affairs of your heart and identity and meaning and purpose really lie. Not just enough to listen to sermons and hear stories and pray for sick relatives. He wants more. Discipleship is a perpetual process of taking the next step with Jesus. It's a process that requires action, and it's a process that includes risk. When Jesus, we don't know what Jesus taught. He was there, he wasn't just hanging out with the fishermen. Mostly he was speaking to the crowd that was on the beach. I would not like to preach from a boat. I sometimes almost fall over just standing here with a pulpit to hold on to. I don't know how that would go. We don't know what he said. And that's not the point of the story. What happens next is more important. Jesus says, hey, Peter, I want you to fish again. Go out in the deep water. Go out to the deep water. Now, that's where the fish were. That's why he told him to go there. But I think there's something evocative, something symbolic about the deep water. Jesus asks us to go to a place where we're over our heads, where we can't touch bottom. Something that includes risk, where we're not in control. And how does Peter respond to this? Well, first of all, he knows better than Jesus. After all, he's the fisherman. He says, I've been at this all night. We're tired. We've repaired the nets. We've been sitting here while you're talking, tending the nets. We've done this. But if you say so, reluctantly, we'll do it. Besides, people are watching, so we'll go. Have you ever followed advice reluctantly? When Laura and I first met, I made dinner for her once. It was a box of spaghetti over which I melted Velveeta cheese and put in some broccoli. That was my, that was the good dish. I'd learned that on my own. So even now, even today, 34 years later, it's not uncommon for me to say something like, okay, I'll try a white sauce out of chicken stock and some cornstarch instead of a bunch of cheese and flour. Well, Peter was like that, reluctantly, letting go of his own judgment, letting go of what he thought he knew to follow Jesus. So I wonder, what more is Jesus calling you to, other than just the routine? What's the next step? Where's the deep water in your life He's asking you to trust Him with? You know, another thing we learn from Peter is that discipleship is a process that includes failure. Failure and correction and continual learning. I have a friend, Carter Crockett. He has a PhD in innovation or entrepreneurialism or something like that. Being creative and doing creative stuff. He says this: one of the first laws of innovation is this: fail early, fail often, fail hard. Like, oh, I could do that, you know. But the truth is, I don't do that. I don't like to fail. And if I weigh the odds and think, nah, there's not a good chance of that working, I don't want to try it. But discipleship, at least the way Peter does it and models it for us, says that we don't need to be afraid of failing. We just keep moving, keep acting. We'll get corrected and back on the right path. Remember Peter. Peter's this guy who was one of the very first ones to acknowledge and profess that Jesus was the Messiah. And then the next thing out of his mouth was saying, and as the Messiah, you shouldn't have to suffer at all. So Jesus shuts him up. How can it be the same thing? One says, he makes this declaration, and God says, Jesus says, you know, blessed are you, Peter. God's revealed this to you. And then the next thing he is exercising his own judgment and says, Jesus, let me tell you how this will go. It'll be smooth and cushy. Jesus says, no, it's not. You don't know a thing. Peter was the one who wanted, when Jesus met them on the water, Peter says, hey, call me out of the boat onto the waves. I want to do this too. That looks great. I could be the only fisherman in Galilee who can walk on the water. And he gets out of the boat, and just a moment later, he's afraid of the waves, and he sinks. Yeah. It was probably, most likely, Peter who shooed the children away. Go away, the master's busy. Only to have Jesus say, hey, I like those kids. Let them come. Peter was the one who, in the Garden of Gethsemane, pulled out his sword and sliced off Malchus' ear. He's a servant of the high priest. How about that? Pretty good swordsmanship. Sliced the ear clean off, only to have Jesus bend over, apologetically say, here, sticks the ear back on the guy. He undoes what Peter so proudly accomplished. You know, it was Peter who swore that he would stay with Jesus till the very end, and then denied him 3 times, denied that he even knew who Jesus was. This process includes failure, includes risk going out in the deep water, it includes action that we're not going to get right often. And Peter just kept acting, kept correcting. You know, right now, Peter probably, of all Christians in the world, probably is the most recognized. You know, he became a leader after Christ's resurrection. The one Catholic tradition has it that he was the first bishop of Rome, and he certainly was a leader among the apostles. But it's not about not making mistakes. We will make mistakes. We'll get things wrong. It's about getting up again. Think about when you had kids, if you raised kids, when they were little, like little toddlers, when they're learning to walk. You know, they stumble along and bonk down on and what do? They bounce up and try it again, fall over again, they get up again, they fall down. Or when they're learning to talk, they just got babble and stuff until something meaningful comes out. And kids just keep trying until they get it right. I'm not like that anymore. I fall down once and think that's enough. Not doing that again. Discipleship, because it is a process, because it's not a static identity that just we move ourselves into one category and then just stay there. It's this movement. Movement always involves risk and change. But finally, there's this we see in Peter, that there's grace in this process. You know, it's easy in our spiritual lives to think this. When I get my act together, when I quit messing up, when I've, done things like prayed consistently and not intentionally sinned against anybody or God, when I have my attitude right and can sing a hymn and mean it, then I can look to God for some closer relationship or some blessing, some provision. But that's not how it goes. Peter pulls up this bumper crop of fish, more than their little boats can handle. Not because he knows himself or he knows who Jesus is fully, not because he has it all together. In fact, the passage reads this way, that they pull up this huge load of fish that's about to sink the boats. And Peter's response then is to begin to see himself more clearly and see who Jesus is more clearly. And he says, go away from me. I'm a sinful guy. It's like, whoa. Jesus, you're not just someone to listen to preach once in a while. You're not just someone to ask for help with a sick family member. You're more than that. And I'm seeing myself more clearly now in light of who you are. And that comes after the blessing, after the provision, after God's grace, not before. It's this ongoing journey. And if your life is like mine, it's not a linear thing that moves like this. It spirals around some of the same issues I wrestle with. Questions of identity and purpose and meaning, competence, belonging, ability to love and to receive love. Sometimes I'm good at those things, sometimes I'm bad at those things, but the journey, tethered to the one who calls to us, by God's grace, keeps moving upward, a little bit of growth at a time, each pass around more strongly. And we don't grow in order to reach a place to receive God's blessing and provision. We act in trust because it is already there and given. The first words in the Gospels that are put to Simon Peter come in Mark's Gospel. And it's simple words, follow me, follow me. And the very last words that are put to Peter in the Gospels, it comes in John's Gospel, chapter 21. And it's the same invitation, follow me. The same invitation, 3.5 years later, something like. And that is the same invitation for us, no matter where we are this week. I ask you this, what is the next step for you? Is there deep water God's asking you to paddle out to? Is there something he's asking you to do against your own better judgment? To hear that voice, you need to make time to listen. So this week, build some quiet time in, not to talk, but to listen. Ask God, what's my next step in following you? Let's close with our final hymn. It's number 346. Come to me, the Master said.